Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to another episode of the Comrade Cast. And today we are back after our summer hiatus, and I am feeling good. I just had my biannual cutting of the hair, bringing myself to look a little bit more professional. So I'm looking good, feeling good. Not to get too vain here, but I've just been very happy with the way things are developing within kind of my own fitness goals and fitness world. Like, come on, guys, here. Look at that beefy forearm. Guns of the people are coming along here pretty good, I feel like. So today, I'm not 100% sure where this episode is going to go. I've got two topics that I have in mind, and we'll see they merge into one another. So we'll see what ends up happening. The nice thing is that the month of August has been slower in terms of the news cycle. It's given us an opportunity to steady ourselves from this whole swirling breakneck speed that everything has been happening in June and July. They were just totally crazy months. Now we can at least steady ourselves and maybe see a little bit about what's going on. Let's start off with the big thing that has happened since our last episode. That is, of course, the announcement of my face is merging into his. We'll move that. But is the announcement of Tim Walz as Kamala Harris's official vice presidential running mate. Now I can see the guy. In any case, this has been an excellent choice. This has been a choice which has absolutely invigorated the left. I haven't seen left-wing people so happy about American politics in a very long time. In fact, the last time since Tim Walz has been announced, I always call him Tim Walz. It's Tim Walz. Walz. I always fucking get it wrong. But since the announcement of Tim Walz as the running mate, the enthusiasm has just skyrocketed even more. Right, we had a ton of enthusiasm after we learned that we're dumping Joe. Thank God for that. A lot of people were skeptical of Kamala coming in, but honestly, she has so far exceeded my wildest expectations, to be quite honest. I thought she would be just like a generic politician, a generic Democrat, but she's actually managed to harness a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, way more than I thought she would. And then bringing in old Timothy here has just brought the excitement up to even the next level. So why are people on the left so excited about Tim Walz? Well, Tim Walz is the current governor of Minnesota. He's very popular. He has a very strong populist left economic platform. His economics are focused in on making lives better for average people, which is a huge plus in my opinion. Guy is also very down to earth in comparison to someone like Kamala Harris, who comes off as quite elitist, quite in her ivory tower, coastal elite above it all, whereas Tim Walz has that much more down-to-earth, Rust Belt, folksy kind of feel, and it helps her certainly contrast her. And having that ability to bring out a guy like Walz, if you want to take the kind of left-wing message and adapt it for a more rural or potentially more working class type of voter that would exist in the Rust Belt, I think Tim Walz is definitely the kind of guy who can do that. Another reason people on the left are excited about Tim is that not only does he have that kind of great track record of actual political and policy achievements within Minnesota, but he comes out and he can actually be an attack dog, a bulldog for left-wing ideas. He's very unfazed and he's very happy to go toe-to-toe and actually articulate high-level left-wing ideas in a way that are much more palatable. Tim Walz has a lot of positives going for him, and plus he really shores up a weakness for Kamala Harris. Adding him to the ticket has brought a huge amount of enthusiasm to the Democratic Party. Quite frankly, I haven't seen this much enthusiasm within the Democratic Party since 2008 when Barack Obama ran. One thing that people are murmuring is that Tim Walz can be kind of a successor to the political movement that Bernie Sanders started, that he can be the next guy to kindle up that flame. I love the optimism. We'll see. I hope that happens, but I'm not going to say yes. Absolutely, that's going to happen. Populist left, as I like to call them, not necessarily the far left, but the kind of more populist-leaning elements of the left have really needed a strong leader to invigorate them, like we had Bernie Sanders do in 2016. And there's a lot of hope and optimism that Walz can do that again here in 2024. And so once again, we will check in with our barometer of Real Clear Politics. We can see that there has been some serious momentum shifting here. The last time we checked, they've actually done a good job here. They've cleaned up the graph where they have the nice division point where Biden withdraws. Man, they should have the point where the debate is, but yeah, look at that gap. That Trump was clearly running away with this thing. He withdraws and we are seeing an almost immediate flip. It didn't happen overnight because as we last checked on Real Clear Politics, Trump was still ahead in the averages, but now that has flipped. And this has been one of the quickest political flips I've seen, certainly in American politics. One of the things, because American politics is campaigning all the time. There are congressional elections every 2 years. People are always fundraising. The political machine is always grinding. This makes Americans much more politically active than, say, Canadians, where our elections just swarm in once every 4 years and nobody thinks about politics until that point in the election. And then in that very short period of time, what happens in Canadian elections is you either have everything is the same, status quo election, or you have this massive shift where one party will come above the other party. And this shift usually happens very quickly during a campaign. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to say here is that because Americans tend to be more politically engaged, think about politics more often than a place like Canada, or again, the UK is another good example because they have a similar system to us. Americans tend to be more stagnant in their political beliefs, and any changes that happen are usually much more gradual and happen over a longer space of time. So seeing something like this in American politics is quite rare. And yeah, so we can see, like I said, we have Harris coming in ahead here. Let's see if we can check on some of the polling here. The one thing that you really like to see if you are running for president is that 50% mark. Having 50% of the vote means that you are much less vulnerable to having your lunch eaten by a third-party candidate or something like that. It means you need a lot less people to come over to get you over the threshold. So it's a good place to be. When was this? We have Rasmussen come out. They're notoriously known to be a right-leaning pollster. So it's not shocking that they would have a +4 for Trump here. And then, of course, we have Fox. We have a +1 for Trump. And then we have a bevy of other polls, Morning Consult, Puel, Ipsos, NPR, all of them having Harris leading between +3 to +1. Let me move it over here and we can see the swing states on the side. We do see some of the swing states tightening up. Why do they have Pennsylvania? That is weird. But yeah, a lot of the polls are now more focusing in on these swing states. And while the national number is always important to get a barometer of where the country is feeling, what they're thinking, where they stand, it's going to be obviously in the American election, the Electoral College, it's going to be the victory within those critical states, which will make up the difference. And despite all of this momentum that Kamala is showing, and as optimistic as a lot of this makes me feel, one of the typical cycles that happens within a political campaign, particularly an American political campaign, is that things tighten up closer towards the end point. So I don't think that this enthusiasm will generate itself all the way until the end of the election. And I do think ultimately still this is a extremely close race. I think this is right now we're sitting at a Harris 55, Trump 45 type of outlook. And I got an interesting comment on the last episode where someone mentioned that the only thing that it took to bring the race back to a 50-50 even split was a candidate that could actually talk. And my thinking is that the status where we were with Joe Biden was the extraordinary circumstance, right? What we are seeing now is more a regression towards the political mean in America because of polarization, effectively since 2016. But you can argue even before that, elections are now decided by a very small portion of the country. But due to polarization, there comes less and less sort of space for anybody in between. So what happens is that the kind of undecideds, the neutrals are all shrinking, right? They've all been shrinking over the last decade or so. And effectively, this makes the race tighter. I don't think we're going to see any crazy landslides in American politics anytime soon, unless we have a drastic change in the American political climate. But right now, it seems like this kind of 50-50 razor's edge. This is the status quo, and things outside that are what are extraordinary. Let's go here. We're going to go to 260 to win. And again, one of my favorite things about this site is it lets you poke around with the math. And I want to do some kind of electoral math here. Look at the states and see who needs to really win where to make it over the cut, to make it over the 270 threshold needed. So let's poke around here. Look at this is the current state that they have based upon the polls. Obviously, solid red are solid Republican, solid blue are solid Democrat, and then the pinkish ones are lean Republican, and then the light blue ones are lean Democrat. And then the kind of neutral ones, tan ones, are toss-ups. So that's the color coding, and there you go. So right now, what we have here is Republicans slightly edging out Democrats in terms of votes, which lean towards their side, but that's only 10 votes. It's really not a huge number. So let's look at some of these states and see who has maybe a decisive edge going into the election. We'll start over here. We'll go from west east in Nevada. I think this one is going to lean Republican, and I think Arizona is going to lean Republican as well. I think that both those states are likely going to be Republican pickups. But again, I could be wrong. Arizona and Nevada both surprised me in 2022. And Arizona did surprise me in 2020 as well. I thought that was going to be a Trump state. I think that for these two states here, I think the Republicans still have the edge. But again, these are very close. So it's certainly not a done deal. Certainly not going to run away with it or anything like that. Moving up, Wisconsin and Michigan. So these two, man, there was a poll, right? When people were starting to get really excited about some of Kamala's momentum, there was a poll that came out that was showing her doing really well in the swing states. And one of them had her up by like plus 11 in Michigan, but then it had like plus 4 for Trump in Pennsylvania. And I was like, what planet are we living on where Michigan and Pennsylvania are 15 points difference from each other? These two states tend to be pretty close in terms of demographic and voting patterns. So I was not enthusiastic about the veracity of that poll. But as we can see, as time has gone on, things are picking up for the Democrats, particularly in the Rust Belt. So I do think that the Democrats have the edge in the Rust Belt. I think that they will pick up Minnesota and Michigan most likely. And that leaves us with two states here that are the real kind of deciders, right? If Republicans win Pennsylvania, that puts them over the threshold by one single fucking electoral college vote, which actually that does put the Republicans probably in the better position. I think of all the Rust Belt swing states, I think Pennsylvania is the biggest toss-up. I think that Michigan and Wisconsin are more likely going to stay with the Democratic column, whereas again, I do think Pennsylvania is probably the actual true toss-up. If Democrats win Pennsylvania, does that put them over the edge? Yeah, the Democrats will win because it is 270 to win. Derp, derp. Yeah, Democrats, whoever wins Pennsylvania, honestly, may win this election. This could be the time where Pennsylvania is the biggest swing state that we have. Looking at Georgia, too, I think Georgia is really interesting because if you had asked me 4 years ago, I would have thought that there's no way that Georgia could be a swing state, a toss-up state. But now it's really in the ballgame. And every time there's an election in Georgia, it's way closer than I think it's going to be. So it, again, is moving towards a real true swing state status. It's interesting that as Florida became more Republican, leaned into the Republican column, the swing state moved north. In any case, even if what we have now, if the Republicans or Democrats win Georgia, it will not be enough to put them over the edge. So let's say the Democrats win in Georgia, but Trump wins in Pennsylvania. That puts the Republicans as the victors. And of course, vice versa. Yeah, Democrats eke it out if they win Pennsylvania. Man. So yeah, there's no question that this is going to be a very tight race. And again, it's going to come down to a handful of states. It might all come down to Pennsylvania or something this time. That is obviously a state that everyone is going to be keeping their eye on when it comes to election night. I just want to do a little bit of poking around in terms of the Sun Belt. So when it comes to Arizona, I think that Arizona is more likely to lean Democrat than Nevada. So if they get Arizona, okay, if they get Arizona, can they afford to lose? No, they can't afford to lose Pennsylvania if they take Arizona. If they took Arizona and Georgia, though, they could lose Pennsylvania. Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia, these three states really, I think, are probably going to be very decisive. Michigan and Wisconsin, again, I don't think that these are going to be as decisive. But Wisconsin, maybe, if one of these states were more likely to turn, it would probably be Wisconsin. In fact, yeah, if Republicans turn Wisconsin, then they eke out a victory. Even if they lose both Arizona and Georgia, well, they got to get Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So, yeah, it's really interesting math, to be honest. Like, this is some of the closest electoral college math that I've seen, definitely since 2000. So it's shaping up to be one hell of a race. It's going to be, again, I think, extremely close when it comes to the final tally. And I still really do believe it's anybody's ball game. These swing states are going to be extremely important. I think it is fair to say that we're stable now. I don't think Kamala is going anywhere. So far, she's not going to rapidly implode or anything like that. So I think she's going to stick around. The convention's coming up here very shortly. That will obviously enshrine her as the Democratic nominee. And there's been a lot of talk about whether or not if Trump is going to drop J.D. Vance. Initially, I thought very unlikely. And then I thought, wow, he might actually do it, given some of the crazy stuff he said in the past and continues to say. But now I'm at 50-50 right now. Actually, no, I probably lean more towards he's going to keep JD. If he's going to dump him, he's got to do it in like the next week or two. Because if he waits too long, especially just before the election, I think obviously he's going to look weak. He's going to look like he made a mistake by picking JD Vance. But if he does the swap-a-roo quickly right now, I don't think it's going to result in a lot of blowback. I think he'll be okay. There might be some people who are upset, but as the election approaches, there's enough time to get over it versus if he does it like a month before the election. I think that would be a pretty disastrous move. But overall, I think that he's probably going to stick with him. But I do really think that there is a serious shot that he could dump him, especially if he feels that he's going to cost him this election. Like if Trump comes to the conclusion that JD is such a drag on the ticket that he's going to cost him the election, I do think he will jettison him. And we talked about it when he chose JD Vance. It was a weird choice. I like to talk about politics. Been following politics all my adult life. And I was struggling to figure out, like, what is the purpose of JD Vance? Why do we have this guy? And it seems nobody really knows what his purpose is. There is a prevailing feeling right now that Republicans are really struggling. And I do think that they are definitely struggling in comparison to where they were. Again, they thought they were going to run away with this thing. And this is not the case at all. Here's my official election prediction, everybody. No fucking sweeps, no crazy blowouts. It's going to be another nail biter, and it's going to come down to very, very few, relatively speaking, right, out of millions of votes, 100,000 votes in a couple of swing states. And as we're just doing the math here, it really illustrates to me how close this race could be. All of these combination of swing states, I think, are real swing states and could legitimately go either way. It's going to be very interesting to see what this electoral college map looks like in November of 2024. But I really do think the Republicans are struggling to find an attack on Kamala. We talked about in the last episode some of the attacks that Republicans were really struggling with and trying to figure out what to attack Kamala with. And one thing that I have seen consistently throughout since 2016, since Trump became a political force, is that people on the right consistently have not the slightest idea what people on the left actually want, particularly someone who identifies as far left like me. It's like these people have no idea what's going on inside my mind, what I actually want, what my political objectives are. One of my biggest pet peeves in politics is when people will call me a liberal or someone who is a liberal a socialist. I find the term liberal to be very offensive to me personally. It's only slightly less offensive than calling me a conservative. But there's this very prominent strain in this idea on the right that liberals and socialists are the same and they want the same things. They do not want the same things and they are not the same. And then, of course, they'll take someone like here in Canada, they'll be like, Justin Trudeau's a socialist. You talk to anyone who's actually a socialist, who's actually on the far left, and they'll be like, no, he's not. That's the most politically ignorant thing anybody has ever said. If Justin Trudeau were truly a socialist, I would be out there simping for him every day. I'd be waving that red flag for him every day. But obviously I don't. In fact, I have a numerous amount of issues with the guy, and I don't particularly like him very much. And we're seeing this again with Tim Walz. A lot of people would be like, well, as a socialist, Tim Walz is a socialist. Old Joe Rogan made the headlines the other day by saying like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are like Kim Jong-un. Just total political ignorance, right? These people are not socialists. And if you were to actually ask a socialist what they think about these people, they would say, yeah, these are not people who align with my political ideology. Now, if you want to make an equivalent, this would be the equivalent of people on the left overusing phrases like Nazi or fascist or whatever to describe like basic bitch Republicans. These rank and file conservatives are not the same thing as fascists or people who are on the far right. There is a very difference of opinion in what these two groups of people want and how they intend to go about achieving their political goals. It's part of the reason why I try and be pretty careful with who I would label someone as a fascist, right? I'm not going to do something like that until I actually hear you saying something openly, which would be like a fascist talking point, fascist piece of propaganda, fascist piece of disinformation, unless you actually came out and said, yes, this is my political ideology, and I'm proud of it. Yeah, that's the reason why, well, I don't think that Donald Trump, for example, is a fascist. There are a lot of people in that political ideology who support him. You'll hear these people screaming like, oh, Kamala's a Marxist. Trudeau is Marxist. Why would you ever believe what these people have to say on who and who is not a Marxist? Do you think fucking Ben Shapiro has ever read Das Kapital? Do you think Ben Shapiro has ever read anything by Vladimir Lenin? Of course he hasn't. And that goes for someone like fucking Tim Pool, goes for someone like Steven Crowder, or any other guy on the right who claims that they know or understand Marxism. They have no fucking idea what Marxism is. They have no fucking idea what Marxists want. And they probably haven't even read a single piece of literature or academic thinking from a communist philosopher in their entire lives. I want to spend a little bit of time clearing up what actual Marxists want, what our political goals are, what people on the far left are actually trying to achieve from the mouth of someone who is a Marxist, who is someone on the far left, rather than someone who thinks that they understand what we want, but really has no clue. For example, I'm sure these guys couldn't even tell you what the difference between a Marxist and a Marxist-Leninist is. This is an extremely important difference if you're in leftist circles. There's a big reason why I consider myself to be a Marxist and not a Marxist-Leninist, because the main difference between these two ideologies is that Lenin brings in this idea of the party vanguard, some sort of like ideological cadre of people who are very dedicated to the revolution, very dedicated to the cause, and they are the ones who will shepherd in everybody into the communist era. Personally, I think the vanguard has been one of the most disastrous ideas for communism. This idea that we need this super ideologically fanatical cadre of people. This has probably been one of the most detrimental things in defining communism for future generations and what exactly the blueprint for a communist society would look like. One thing I have always wished is that communism arose initially in a country that didn't have a history of authoritarianism, like because this Russian authoritarian attitude and governmental style got grafted onto communism, and this Marxist-Leninist ideology got grafted onto communism. A lot of people think that it is inherent to the ideology. It is absolutely not. One of the biggest mistakes I personally believe that socialist and communist societies made in the past was the censoring of expression, of art, of freedom of speech. Marx talks a lot about how we can use a lot of our artistic abilities and expressions to beautify public spaces, to make public spaces more inviting, more aesthetically pleasing, places that people want to be around, which is, of course, in direct contrast to the very identical style of architecture and art and culture that we got from communist societies. That is why, if you ask me what political label I identify most with, I would say a syndicalist, because a syndicalist, in essence, is someone who is economically a communist, doesn't believe in free markets, doesn't believe in free trade, but is culturally libertarian, who has no desire to censor people or tell them what to say or tell them how to think. But when I tell somebody, hey, I'm a syndicalist, they're like, what the fuck is that? Don't always have the time to explain the nuances. Another thing that Marx talks about is the idea that within sort of our communist society, that not only do you meet your kind of basic needs, food, water, shelter, the society needs to meet our more auxiliary needs as well. Our need for belonging, our need for family, our need for love, our need for entertainment, our need to express ourselves artistically. These are all rights within a traditional Marxist society, within a traditional Marxist framework, which should be absolutely included and provided to its citizens. And this brings me to one of the claims that conservatives make against communists, against Marxists, that is not true, but even sometimes Marxists themselves will lean into it, which is this idea that family is bad, the nuclear family is bad, we don't want people to have families. This is, again, total nonsense. Of course, people want, as we talked about, people have a need for love, they have a need for companionship, and society should do its best to facilitate that, not put obstacles in the way. Can you guys think of how much easier your love life would be if you didn't have to worry about constantly, oh man, where's my next paycheck going to come? How am I going to feed myself? How am I going to keep a roof over my head? If you took away all of those basic stressors, don't you think that relationships would flourish a lot more? Don't you think we'd see a lot less divorces than we do in our current society? Marxists want people to get together, form stable families, and have those kind of loving bonds and connections, which are absolutely vital for a functioning society. The issue where you get into people talking about how family is bad or the institution of the family is bad comes in, which I think no matter how far right you are, you can agree with me, comes in the inherent inequality of who your parents are, right? This is the greatest lottery in our lives, the sperm lottery. Who our parents are decides so much of where we fit into society. One of the biggest goals for communists is to find a way to equalize the sperm lottery, right? It's not elimination of the family. It's trying to find ways that we can make it so if you are born into, right? And this is one of the things that a lot of people move towards anti-family thinking if they have had poor families, if they've had families who have abused them, who are maybe narcissists, who maybe favor one child over another. There are so many people out there that had poor family lives, that had poor parents, and who struggled to get by. And for those people, the idea of a kind, nurturing family like I personally had the blessing to grow up with, this kind of concept is alien to them. They don't really have a frame of reference for what that would look like. And that's where they get this idea that we got to eliminate the family or get rid of the institution. And that is, and I think no matter how far right you are, I think you can agree that having a terrible family, having an abusive family is a horrific thing and a terrible thing, and that we should do something about that to alleviate it. And I don't think it's any wonder why people who might have rough family upbringings are a little bit more skeptical of the kind of nuclear family, because they came from a family where maybe that nuclear family constantly abused them. So I think there's a real gap, because having a loving, stable family that cares about you is one of the most beautiful and wonderful things on the planet. But having an abusive family that belittles you and crushes you is one of the most horrific tortures that anybody can endure in their lifetimes. And these two kind of groups of people don't really have a good reference for understanding where the other one is coming from. So the goal for communists is not the elimination of the family, but trying to figure out, how do we eliminate abusive elements from the family? How do we make it so if someone is born into an abusive family that isn't going to take care of them, that isn't going to meet their needs, how can they equalize ourselves in society and actually be able to get ahead and not have this massive handicap weighing them down for the rest of their lives? So, when you tell somebody who comes from a bad family background that family is great, we should expand this and everybody should have them, they don't think like Leave It to Beaver, everything is hunky-dory type of family. They envision their own horrible past and own background and imagine having that spread out to more people and more people having to endure that. So those are the two biggest, I think, misconceptions about communism right now that people have. This idea that it's inherently authoritarian and wants to take away your freedom of expression, and that it is inherently anti-family. Neither of these are true in any way, shape, or form. You'll hear sometimes when it comes to like leftists thinking about families, you'll hear things like, it takes a village to raise a child. And you'll even hear some people on the right like talk about how we need to have a kind of more village mentality to bring the old ways and traditions and taking care of kids and that kind of stuff. But I feel like people don't really understand what it takes a village to raise a child actually means. I had a guy from Uganda explain to me what his society, what it takes a village to raise a child actually means. What it means is that, let's say you have a kid and he gets into the farmer's fields and he crushes some crops or something like that, whatever, gets into trouble, and the farmer disciplines him, yells at him, hopefully doesn't hit him, but like yells at him, says, get the fuck out of here, go away type of thing, maybe disciplines him in some other manner. And then you as parent know that your kid probably deserved that discipline. Like, you accept that the farmer was in his right to discipline your child. You probably even know this farmer. You've gone to feast with him. He's actually a pretty good guy, a pretty reasonable guy. So if he's getting mad at your kid, there's probably a good reason. So in essence, what this boils down to is that it's a much higher trust society where you trust the people around you to maybe take care of your children's interests and treat your children appropriately based on their actions, versus our society right now. Like, if you live in an apartment or something, there's probably no way you're going to trust your apartment neighbor to watch your kids unless you actually talk to them, because who knows? This could be some sort of weird crackhead. Who the fuck knows who this guy is? You can't trust who this person is, versus when you grew up, this kind of village type of mentality where everybody knows each other, everybody knows each other's mentality, right? And even if the farmer was over the line type of thing, in that case, the village would come together and support you as the parent and back you up and be like, hey, this guy crossed the line type of thing. So that's what it takes a village to raise a child really means. It means that you have a more high trust society where you can feel comfortable that your neighbors and other people in the village will treat your kids appropriately. But yeah, the sperm lottery is a real Gordian knot, and I don't know what the best answers are personally to untangle that. But this has definitely been something in communist theory that people have been thinking about and trying to untangle for a very long time. I don't know what the appropriate way to deal with this is. I know it's definitely not like tearing kids away from their parents as they're born or redistributing them to other people or some ridiculous nonsense. Of course, this isn't the way, but there has to be something that we can do within society to level out this inequality. So that brings us back to Kamala. There are certainly more I could talk about, the misconceptions of communism and that kind of stuff. I could have a whole, probably several episodes actually explaining that kind of stuff. So if people want more of that shit, certainly let me know. Coming back to Kamala, one of the attacks consistently again levied against her and levied against people on the left by people on the right. And I saw Bay Boy say this like just the other day, that, Kamala Harris just wants to come in. She just wants to trans your kids. That's all she wants to do. Trans your kids. And it's really funny. Like in the past, 8 years, particularly the discourse about trans people on the left has waned as people look towards other things and other ideas and other types of politics that they want to promote. It's really not that common anymore that people unprompted on the left are bringing up trans people or talking about trans people, right? I don't think that there has been any indication at all in Kamala's speeches about what her position is on trans issues. I think it's been pretty vague. I don't think she's ever said anything directly, and she barely talks about trans issues whatsoever. But somehow Benny Boy gets the notion that she's coming for your kids. She wants to get your kids, right? But you'll see consistently it's people on the right bringing up and talking about trans issues now. It's no longer people on the left. It has become like their one go-to attack. And I don't think left-wing people have done enough they understand that what they're trying to do. I don't think they do enough to contradict it in some ways. But it's always been very frustrating to me that the right can't seem to differentiate between this idea of wanting trans people to feel safe and comfortable in society so they can express themselves versus people on the left wanting to take your kids and make them trans. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, why would people on the left do that? Why would they care about that when the obvious thing that they actually do care about is protecting trans people's rights and ensuring that, again, they have that safety and freedom within society? It's not about creating more trans people. It's about protecting the trans people that exist and those that will exist in the future. And the way you'll see like some people on the right square the circle is they get really fucking gnarly territory. Maybe even one could say weird territory, where you'll see like I saw this clip. It was Charlie Kirk. He was talking about how it's like, well, the reason why all leftists want to trans your kids is because they are being corrupted by the devil and they're being like sent information by the devil. And this is like a holy war between you and the leftists to defend your kids, because the only reason why they would want to do that is because they're working for the devil. That's the only thing that makes sense. And I guess if you like spiral like further enough down that rabbit hole and you become so alienated from what left-wing people actually want and what you think they want, I guess you could end up in that kind of bizarre headspace. But I personally, as a leftist, decided that I got to cut down on my calls with Satan. We were talking 3 or 4 times a week. It was too much, right? Too much Satan. I cut it down to 1 time a week. But on the other hand, I've really been increasing my talk time with Baba Yaga. Me and her actually go way back. Anyway, my point here is that I would really appreciate it if the right started to make an effort to figure out and talk about what we actually want and what our political goals are. Because this is something I pride myself, is that I actually go and listen to right-wing people to figure out what right-wing people believe. I don't go through a lot of the guys on the left who I listen to and take their opinion as what right-wing people believe and what right-wing people want. I'm more than capable of asking them myself, listening to them myself, and hearing them out myself. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out there because a little bit of a pet peeve, a little bit of monkey on my back. And with that, we are going to wrap up this episode. So I want to thank you guys for watching. This has been the Comrade Cast. And until next time, you guys take care.